guys, welcome to another TBV59C video. This is the continuation of the podcast, The Sinking of the Bismarck, The Deadly Hunt by William Shirer. Okay, so, Chapter 6, Where is the Bismarck? Loss of contact with the Bismarck caused the British government in London, as Prime Minister Winston Churchill later admitted, the utmost anxiety. For Admiral Tovey, whose fleet had got within 100 miles of the enemy and then lost her, there were a number of urgent questions to try and answer on that morning of May 25th. Had the Bismarck turned west toward Greenland to meet a German tanker for refueling? Had she turned south for a rendezvous with a tanker near the Azores? Or southeast for repairs at Brest or Saint-Nazaire on the French coast? Or had she perhaps turned back to the Denmark Strait, where she could continue home to bases of military in Germany? After considering all the possibilities, Sir John chose the first two, that the Bismarck was steering either west for Greenland or south for the Azores in order to refuel. He directed the cruisers Suffolk and Norfolk to cover the west and northwest courses. He ordered the carrier Victorious to send planes on aerial search in that general direction. Her protection and cruisers were to accompany her. The battlecruiser Repulse was now so short of oil that she was instructed to leave the squadron and proceed to Newfoundland for refueling. On the way, she would be in a position to cover the western search area. The battleship Ramillies, with some 400 miles to the south and steaming almost due north. She was told to continue on course. She was old and slow and hardly able to stand up to the Bismarck should they meet alone. But she was all the British had at the moment to engage the German battleship if she had veered south towards the Azores. Sir John himself turned southwest with what he had left of his home fleet. Not much was left. His battle cruiser and carrier, as well as his cruisers and destroyers, were gone. His one remaining battleship, King George V, was scarcely a match for the more powerful Bismarck. So he ordered her sister ship, Prince of Wales, to join him. Though crippled, Prince of Wales had doggedly remained in the search with the Suffolk and Norfolk. She now left them to join Admiral Tovey's flagship. There were other British heavy ships which might play a vital role if the Bismarck were found again. The chief of these was the battleship Rodney. Although the Rodney, as we have seen, was badly in need of repairs, her commander was sure she could put up a good fight if necessary. All night long, the Rodney had been steaming at full speed to join Admiral Tovey. About 3 a.m. on the 25th, when a destroyer escort began to fall behind in the rough seas, Captain Dalrymple Hamilton pushed his battleship on alone, leaving his destroyers to catch up as best as they could. When he learned 2 hours that the Bismarck had been lost, the Rodney was about 400 miles southeast of the German ship's last known position. This, the captain saw at once, was a pretty good place in which to be. He was sure that the Bismarck was now making for a French or Spanish port for repairs. If so, the Rodney was almost directly in her way. The wisest course, however, was for Captain Dalrymple Hamilton to stop and remain just about where he was. And that is what he did. Vice Admiral Somerville's Force H, including the battlecruiser Renown, the aircraft carrier Ark Royal, and the cruiser Sheffield, was still more than 1,000 miles to the southeast. All it could do for the moment was to continue at full speed to the northwest. At first it seemed to Somerville that he had left Gibraltar too late to get in on any action. But then it began to occur to him that, if the Bismarck made for a Spanish or French port, he might still join the fight. He pressed on as fast as he could. Okay, next. Unlike Somerville and Captain Dalrymple Hamilton, The commander-in-chief of the home fleet did not believe that the lost Bismarck was heading southeast towards Spain or France. All morning long, from 6 a.m. until nearly 7 o'clock, Admiral Tovey steered southwestward, searching in vain for the vanished enemy. Then the British had a stroke of luck. Admiral Lutyens broke radio silence. Early in the morning, the admiral had begun to send a series of coded radio messages to German naval headquarters reporting the Bismarck's position and other information. The British were dumbfounded but grateful. They could not decode the German admiral's figures having his latitude and longitude, but they could determine the position fairly accurately by means of radio direction finding stations in Britain and Northern Ireland. Why did the crafty and experienced German admiral take such a risk? Not one of his messages were urgent or even necessary. We discovered this after the war when the contents of the messages became available from the German naval archives. Why did he send them and risk giving away his position when the whole British Navy was vainly searching for a trace of him? Here again a human error crept in. Admiral Lutyens didn't know the British had lost him. He thought he was still being shadowed. Indeed, in the very first radio message sent at 7:27 on the morning of May 25th, he stated, "One battleship and 2 heavy cruisers maintaining contact. We had no idea that the 1 battleship, Prince of Wales, and 2 heavy cruisers, Suffolk and Norfolk, had completely lost him more than 4 hours before. So he continued to send off his radio messages. And the British direction-finding radio stations continued to get a fix on him. Then Admiral Lutyens had a stroke of luck. This, too, was due to a weird but human error, this time an error of the British. Aboard Admiral Tovey's flagship, a mistake was made in simple arithmetic. The British Admiralty in London had radioed the Admiral's ship at 10:30, giving the bearings on Bismarck, as believed at 8:52 a.m. by the direction-finding sets. For some unexplainable reason, the Admiralty failed to give the position of the Bismarck as it had been plotted from the radio bearings. This was a costly price of negligence. But in the navigation room on the King George V, it was easy to plot the enemy's position from the bearings given. A navigation officer proceeded to do so. Perhaps he was in a hurry. It is said that his charts were not sufficiently detailed. Whatever the reason, he made a false mathematical calculation. This put the position of the Bismarck considerably to the north of where she had been when last seen on the Suffolk's radar at 3 a.m. Admiral Tovey was forced to conclude that the Bismarck had turned north in the darkness and was heading home. He immediately reversed course to northeast and advised all other search ships to steer accordingly. At full speed, Sir John's home fleet headed off in what turned out to be the wrong direction. 2 British warships declined to follow the orders of the commander-in-chief. Captain Dalrymple Hamilton on the battleship Rodney concluded that if the Bismarck were really heading northeast, he wasn't too far south to catch her. But he was now sure in his seaman's bones that the German battleship was making for France. In that case, the Rodney would be in her way. The captain, therefore, against superior orders, remained where he was. Rear Admiral Wake Walker aboard the cruiser Norfolk also felt in his bones that the Bismarck must have turned toward Brest or St. Nazaire on the French coast on his own, and also contrary to Admiral Tovey's orders, he set course in that general direction. Force H, coming up from Gibraltar, was not under the direct command of Sir John. Vice Admiral Somerville aboard the Renown received Admiral Tovey's orders for a new search northeast, but he also disregarded them. He decided to follow instructions of the Admiralty, received shortly before, and assumed that the Bismarck was heading for France. In the Admiralty in London there was much confusion. No one at the nerve center of the British Navy in London noticed that Admiral Tovey's plotting of the position of the Bismarck was at variance to their own, and that the home fleet obviously was going off in a mad chase in the wrong direction. As the hours passed, most of the top-ranking naval officers in London became certain that the Bismarck was making for France. Yet Admiral Tovey was not informed of this. Finally, at 3:30 in the afternoon, Tovey received a radio message from the Admiralty giving a new position for the Bismarck. This had been plotted from radio directional bearings received from the enemy ship's radio 2 hours before. Admiral Lutyens had continued to send out a stream of radio messages all day. The 25th of May was his birthday, and he had received a number of birthday congratulations radioed from Berlin. Even Adolf Hitler sent him a message. Best wishes on your birthday. It was perhaps only natural for the German admiral to reply, and thus by his radio broadcasts would unwittingly keep the British informed of his course and changing position. He was sure he was being shadowed. There was no sense in maintaining radio silence when the enemy had a ship on its radar screen and knew exactly where he was. At 8:46 a.m., Naval Group West, under whose command he now was, he radioed Lutyens that it was believed that had given the slip to his pursuers. Last enemy contact report, it advised, was at 2:02:13 hours, 2:13 a.m. We have impression that contact with Bismarck has been lost. Unfortunately for himself, his ship, and the crew, the headstrong German admiral did not believe it. He still failed to believe it at 6:30 that evening when Group West again radioed him saying that there had been no British reports of sight Bismarck all day. Thus the mistakes on both sides were contributing to the sharpening of the tense drama now approaching its climax. The position of the Bismarck, radioed by the Admiralty to Sir John at 3:30 on the afternoon on May 25th, came as a shock to the commander-in-chief. It showed that the enemy battleship was not heading north, but southeast for a French port. It meant that Admiral Tovey had for several hours been engaged in a wild goose chase in the wrong direction. Indeed, he realized that during the early afternoon the Bismarck must have passed him on her way south, and now would have a head start in the race for the French coast. Completely baffled, Admiral Tovey asked his navigation officer to check his arithmetic in the original plotting of the enemy's position. The officer did so and found his mistake. The German battleship had been pointing toward France all day. At 6:10 p.m., Sir John, after waiting in vain for further word from the Admiralty, steered the home fleet around and set a new course southeast. An hour later, the Admiralty approved. All British ships in the Atlantic, it ordered, were to try and intercept the Bismarck on her way to France. The newly discovered course of the German vessel immediately put several British warships out of the race, for their fuel supplies were fast dwindling. The Ramilles had dropped out earlier in the day on receipt of the false news that the Bismarck had turned northeast. The old British battleship was much too slow to attempt to catch up on the new course. Therefore, during the early afternoon, the Admiralty had instructed her to take over the troopship Britannic, which the Rodney had to abandon the day before. The Ramilles was to escort the Britannic on to Canada. The cruiser Suffolk, which had turned west to look for the enemy off Greenland, was much too far away to join in the chase toward Brest. She now made for a refueling station in Iceland. So did the Cara Victorious and her escorting cruisers. The crippled Prince of Wales was also low on oil. She was ordered home. The Norfolk's oil tanks were getting dangerously low, but Rear Admiral Wake Walker decided to risk remaining in the chase with her. The 25th of May had been another dark and frustrating day for Admiral Tovey. As evening came, with mounting seas, a stiff wind from the northwest, and a falling barometer, he took stock of his situation. He hoped to give battle to Bismarck at 9 o'clock that morning, but during the hours just the night preceding, she had been lost. Soon afterward, he had a stroke of luck when Admiral Lutyens broke radio silence. Because of a mistake in arithmetic on Tovy's own flagship, this good fortune had led him off a wild goose chase instead of bringing him into quick contact with the enemy. As darkness fell over stormy seas, he was alone. The once mighty home fleet had been reduced to one battleship, his flagship King George V. The Hood was lost. All the other war vessels had to return to base to refuel. His own ship was dangerously low on oil. He had already had to reduce speed to conserve it. At reduced speed, how could he catch and engage the Bismarck? He calculated that she was already at least 100 miles ahead of him and faster than his own ship. The Romney was somewhere in front of him, but just where Tovey did not know. The captain, unlike the German admiral, had been observing radio silence all day. And finally there was Force H, which had been coming up full steam from Gibraltar. Within 24 hours or so, he out to meet her. The more the commander-in-chief thought about it on that grim, stormy evening, the more he saw that Vice Admiral Somerville's squadron was probably his last and only hope. It stood between the Bismarck and safe refugee at Brest or St. Nazaire. The battlecruiser Renown could scarcely be expected to stand up to the more powerful German battleship. The planes from the carrier Ark Royal might slow her down with torpedoes. Of course, the planes from the carrier Victorious had not been very successful in a similar attempt the night before. Still, this was about his only hope. The torpedo-carrying Swordfish from the Ark Royal would at least have to reduce the speed of the Bismarck if Admiral Tovey were to catch her. But first, the enemy battleship had to be found. Sir John had a general idea of her whereabouts from the radio direction finders, but she had not been sighted by eye or radar since the night before. She must now be found, or the chase was up. For this, too, the scouting planes of the Ark Royal seemed to be his last hope, but unknown for the troubled British admiral, there was still another source of hope. Okay, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share this video with your friends, and okay, see you for the next episode. Bye!